Good evening. Welcome, everybody, both here physically at the Royal Society and also our online participants to our FST event this evening, Scaling Up Deep Tech Companies in the UK, Challenges and Solutions. Scaling up is the hot topic. I was indeed at a meeting involving the Chancellor this afternoon where he had the Scale Up Challenge pretty much the top of his list for the science and tech agenda. So not for the first time, the FST is covering the right topic with the right people at the right time. And we've got an excellent panel. We'll hear from our four panelists, and then we'll have a discussion, including, of course, I'll be taking questions from our online participants. So do feel free to use the Q&A function if you are participating online to put down questions. We'll try to identify those as well. And use the Q&A function, not the chat function. And of course, do remember also, if you're participating online, to upvote the questions that you find most topical, because that will help us select the right ones. So we have an excellent panel. Our first speaker is Lemia Armour. She joined Amadeus Capital Partners in 2009, is a partner in the Early Stage Fund, is involved on several boards. She worked at Barclays Investment Bank before that and has been on is on the government's semiconductor advisory panel. So Amelia, straight over to you.
Thanks, David, and it's lovely to see everyone tonight. Just to give you a feel for what Amadeus is doing, we're an early stage deep tech investment fund. We've been around for 25 years, and in that time we've invested in over 180 companies. And we have offices in Cambridge and London, and about 40% of our investments are in Cambridge spin-outs. And the reason why we're so excited about deep tech in the UK is driven by the strong research and technology development that we see at the universities here. As you all know, we have 4 of the top 10 global universities in the UK, 7 out of the top 10 in Europe. So we're creating loads of amazing ideas. And that's brilliant at the very early stage. But what we come across sometimes is problems of taking these amazing tech and scaling those to companies which have amazing products. And just to touch on a couple of things where we see the real difficulties in the UK versus maybe other areas, is one of them is in funding and one of them is in talent to do that scale up. So within Europe, the UK takes the greatest share of funding into deep tech companies after France, Sweden, and Germany. And at the earlier stages, that's great. We have a vibrant seed stage list of investors. We have angel investors, we have EIS investors. And so per capita, we generate a significantly high number of startup companies. But what we find with deep tech companies is they take longer to scale. So compared to other technology companies, which don't have the strong IP breakthroughs, it's 25 to 40% longer between funding rounds that these companies take to get to those next milestones. And that means that they need to raise more funding to get from stage to stage. And at the earlier stages, that's fine, but we have problems later on to get enough capital to really grow these companies to the size that we would like. Now, there are shoots of glimmer of things improving in the UK. We're hopeful that some pension money will be released to support this asset class. And we also see initiatives such as the Breakthrough Fund, which has come from the British Business Bank setting up a few years ago, which has 375 million to invest in the types of companies that we're supporting. But there's more that we could do there. Even at the seed stage, we could take larger funding rounds to help our companies get through these early milestones much more quickly. And then the second area, which I think is important, where we could really do with more input in scaling these companies, is around talent. I have one example of an AI company that is really looking to grow its product function. So really, understanding what the customer wants, listening to the voice of the customer so that can feed back into the product they're developing. They've hired multiple times in the UK, each time with failure. They haven't been able to find a strong enough person to lead their product function in the UK. And so they've had to go to the US to hire that person. And because we don't have this developed ecosystem of scaling companies to a later stage, we don't have the outpouring of talent that then comes back into the more junior and companies. To give you a feel for the number of unicorns that are in the UK versus the US, at the end of last year, there were just under 600 in the US and just under 50 in the UK. And so this scale makes a real difference in terms of talent that can be coming to support the junior companies. But I think this ecosystem is really developing. We look at the amount of investment that comes into deep tech over the last 10 years, it's now moved from 10% of total VC investment in the UK to now 20%. And so it is growing, but there's a lot more that can be done. And it will be interesting to discuss other people's ideas throughout this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amelia. I'm delighted that our second speaker is Simon Thomas, who is the CEO of Paragraph, the company he founded in 2018, which has developed novel manufacturing techniques for graphene fabrication. And I must say, I have known Simon and Paragraph for a long time, because advanced materials was one of the original 8 great technologies. And I have always been very impressed by the massive technical challenges that they have tackled and addressed at Paragraph. And Simon, as we know, including from his frequent public appearances, has fought his own battles on the scale-up challenge. And Simon, we very much look forward to your comments. Over to you.
That's great. Thank you, David. Yeah, you have seen a lot of what we've been through. It was great to get the invitation to to speak today, because I always love it when I get the slot where I can just moan about everything. I mean, brilliant. No, I'm going to preface what I'm about to say, because there are some challenges I'm going to talk about. I'm going to preface with it. The UK is a great place to be. I love being here. I think it's a fantastic, fertile ground for exactly what Amelia just said, the growth of innovation, the growth of new ideas, and the bringing of new technologies into the world. So the challenge that comes to us is how we then turn that into real value. So I know Amelia said that the Amadeus are an early stage funder, but actually they've stayed with us for the whole of our journey, which is fantastic. So that great support has pushed us on. Just before I talk about the challenges that we faced and give you a little bit of a flavor of what you actually have to go through in order to be able to build a business here, I just want to frame it in the type of business that Paragraph is. So Paragraph is a deep technology business. So we do a lot of research, generate a lot of IP. We're a hard technology business. We actually make stuff, we actually manufacture stuff. We're a materials technology. So a lot of fear over investing in materials technologies. And also we're a global business now. We have 3 sites globally and we're supported over in Asia. And this means we need specific things to grow. And if we don't have any one of these 4 things, then we're unable to grow successfully and efficiently. So really specialist skills, as Amelia just pointed out, talent, sustained capital. It takes longer with deep tech to get to a point where you can actually realize the value in a big way. Suitable infrastructure, which I'll come on to in a short while. And of course, a supportive freedom to operate. What that really means is the environment in which we live. Do we have the ability to move forward? So I just wanted to put that up, because if I don't talk about problems that AI companies have, I apologize. This is our field that we work in. I don't talk about problems that software companies have. This is where Paragraph has actually had the experience. So I could actually stand here all night and tell you about all the challenges that you go through in order to scale a company. It's a difficult job, but it's an exciting job to try and grow a company from the inception. What I thought I'd try and focus on is just the 4 critical challenges that I believe if we solve in the landscape in the UK, then everybody will benefit from it, and everybody will have a much greater chance of growing that scaled company and realizing that value at the end. To kind of get a little bit of your participation, not now, but afterwards, what you're going to see is these 4 areas, and I'm going to outline the challenge to you. I'm going to outline what's happened with Paragraph and how we think it could be a bit better. And then there's a statement at the end of each one. The statement comes from what we've learned in Paragraph as we've grown. And I'd like you to consider 2 things. Firstly, what does the output of that statement actually mean? And secondly, how can we're all learned people in this room, we've all been through journeys. How can we possibly suggest ideas to make that statement happen? Because if all 4 of these statements happen, then we're in utopia. So please think about it as we go through. So let's just do the easy one first. Access to capital. In the UK, we are fantastic at funding early stage businesses, innovation, bringing it forward. VC funds like Amadeus have done a great job at bringing out the innovations from university and showing that they've got real value at that early stage. But as you can see, as we get towards later stage, the support drops off and it's getting worse. So we are not yet realizing that in order to get the main value out of the company, just as it starts to turn the corner of creating GDP, that we need to put more money and hold that bet in order to get there. To give you an example from a Paragraph perspective, we've had to scale through a very capital intensive roadmap. And every time I go out to fundraise, it has 2 impacts. The first one is I've got to spend a lot of time raising that capital and convincing people. But the second part of that is I'm not doing my job. So there's a double whammy here when we have to fundraise. And I'd like people when we're thinking about funding, particularly in a scaling company, just how much time is taken out of the hands of the CEO. The guy that's supposed to, or the girl who's supposed to run that business and bring it through to success is not actually in the room where that needs to happen. So really, when we've been out to the investment sphere, there's only one thing that matters to investors, and that is what is the risk? What is the risk of them losing their capital? And the way we offset that is we show them that we're not a risky business to invest in. I'm sorry, scaling tech is a risky business to invest in. So the question is, what if we could lower the investment risk for private capital? For example, look at EIS rules. Look at different pools of capital that can come from the government. I know some of these are being tackled at the moment, but they're still open questions. Can we start using different monies that are invested in the UK ecosystem to fund scaling companies? Oh, just a few ideas. So number 1, access to capital is probably the largest challenge at the moment, considering the world we're in today as well. To follow up on what Amelia said as well, access to talent. The UK has got a lot of growing businesses in innovative tech spaces where they are not the world leader in growing the business, but they are the world leader in the technology. So we don't have the talent base. So how do we get that? My biggest challenge, Amelia's just brought up an example of an AI company that's hired a product director or product manager and not got the right strong character. I've hired 3 CCOs and still not got it right. And yet I've hired one of the most expensive recruitment firms to try and get that right, and it's still not happened. So talent is a real challenge for all scaling companies. We've got open job positions right now that we can't hire for, 12 months open. And something else to think about, and this is probably something to go on one of the later slides, we've actually had visas turned down for skilled people, and particularly in a case that's happened recently, somebody we really wanted to hire that could train internally and grow our talent base has gone to a competitor in Germany because we couldn't get a visa. It's crazy. So we're actually handing an advantage to somewhere else. So what would happen if UK talent strategy was industry-led? And that's my true feeling. If we want to grow industry in the UK, there needs to be a big input into how do apprenticeships work? How do internships work? How do we get courses into university that focus on industry as opposed to just focusing on a subject? What do BTechs do? What do we do with qualifications to have on-the-job training in these industries? And there are many people sitting in this room who will have the same opinion. Well, if we could do this, then we'd have a great talent base. So think about that. What can we do about talent? Third thing is access to infrastructure. We have to admit this. I know this is a bit of a challenging statement. We are a service-based industry country. We have lots and lots of infrastructure for Amazon warehouses. We have no infrastructure for growing manufacturing businesses. I know this. Paragraph traveled the whole company to find our ideal site within the UK. Couldn't find a single site that could give us the power we needed. Incredible. Yeah, I can go down to Peterborough right now and talk to a landlord and say, can we have this warehouse? They'll say yes, as long as Amazon turns it down first. Crazy. So what if manufacturing sites were as easy to build as service-based infrastructure? What do I mean by that? Planning permission gets in the way. We had a builder wanting to build a custom site for us, and they said, in 3 years' time, we'll have it done for you. In 3 years' time, we won't be here. So getting the rules changed, getting the regulations changed, and having those ideas as how we can provide infrastructure is absolutely critical. I mean, David was a key component in the catapults. I really feel that the catapults haven't moved on enough since they were incepted, but that's just my opinion. And the fourth thing, so the fourth major challenge for me, and this is becoming more and more prominent for Paragraph over the last few years, is policy in the UK. We're in the semiconductor industry. I don't need to go into the background of what happened with the semiconductor strategy. You know, it went on for way too long, and still we have lack of clarity in it. So understanding policies actually for Paragraph is now costly. Understanding what the NSI Act means in terms of where we can deal in different countries. Understanding what the trade regulations are for graphene, for example, and understanding where we can trade and where we can't trade because of the type of goods that we make is really time consuming and really costly, especially when our focus should be on growing our commercial base, not wondering how we can get our product into a country. So how can we address this? Well, what if industry led the strategy for cross-party agreement? I know this is something that you just brought up, but this really is key. We need to go across administrations. We need to forget about how we want to run the country as different parties, but how we actually want to run it together as an underlying bed, if you like, an underlying foundation as to how industry is going to move forward. If we don't do that, we'll be asking the same question time and time again for the next few years. So they're the four challenges, but actually there's one more important thing that comes out of this. Those challenges are not independent. The way in which we set policy determines how we can get talent into the country. The way in which we've got talent determines whether we can build the infrastructure. And the way that we have all of those three things determines whether we can get capital. If we want inbound investment into this country to raise the amount of capital that we have to grow a business, then let's have the government make it clear to the rest of the world that we want business in this country. How do we do that? We build the infrastructure and say, you can have your factory here. How do we do that? We educate people and say, yeah, you can get all the people you need from here. So they're not mutually exclusive. And if you plug them all together, I truly do believe that the UK can be absolutely fantastic in not just manufacturing, but in deep tech exploitation, because it's the exploitation point that delivers the real value of those ideas that happened 5-10 years ago in university. So hopefully you've got some ideas to ask the panel later about those 4 points that I've just raised. Really come up with some really hard questions, please, just not aimed at me. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That was the challenge that we expected. Thank you so much, Simon. And as you were talking about the importance of cross-party understanding, it's great that we have the Shadow Science and Innovation Minister with us this evening, who I'm sure was interested in what you were saying. Our third speaker is Scott O'Brien. He is Chief Investment Officer at Innovate UK. Before that, he worked at the British Business Bank. He was involved in the development of innovation loans. He has also been involved in developing Innovation Hub, a gateway. And while I've been describing Scott, I should have referred at the same time as referring to Chi. It's great to see that we've also got the former Science Minister, George Freeman, with us. So we really do have a proper cross-party opportunity. It's great to see George as well. Scott, over to you.
Thank you, and not at all intimidating to have my former minister at the back of the room either. So it's a great privilege for me to speak here today. And if you'll just forgive me for a moment, I noticed on the website of the foundation that it was founded in 1977. When we think about the 47 years since then and technology development and everything else, and having also been founded in 1977 myself, I feel like I might be slightly behind the curve, but that's fine. So I'm really proud to be here representing Innovate UK, because we are the business-facing end of UKRI research and innovation. And the pride comes from being part of an organisation that's currently supporting about 6,500 projects, that last year processed over 4,500 applications. And that volume and that sense of momentum that's coming from the research-based through business-led innovation is really powerful. And it also comes from the shifts in thinking that we're beginning to go through in Innovate UK. And part of that is making, and it's interesting it came up in the previous speech, is making Innovate UK more product-centered. And that means thinking more about the user, not just creating something which is easy to administer and so on and pushing it out, but listening to the needs of innovators. And of course, one of the big needs identified is the needs of scale-up businesses, which Innovate UK traditionally, we've been great at helping that sort of early stage technology transfer, spin out and things like that. But actually, we realized that we have to help those businesses then scale and grow beyond what we potentially do, but getting into private capital and actually getting to market and scaling effectively. Now, I can't run through all of our products and services at the moment, but I'm going to focus on the ones that I think are particularly relevant to scaling businesses. So the first, Innovate UK is not all about grants. Grants are a great way of fostering collaboration, de-risking earlier stages, cutting-edge, high-risk innovation, but they're not always the answers for businesses looking to achieve commercial growth and scale. Sometimes what a business needs at that point is guidance, an external voice to write constructive challenge. And at Innovate UK, we have a scale-up program aimed at providing those things, and our scale-up directors are experienced business people with an innovation lens who work with individual businesses to support them as they mature. And there's actually already also a pilot program running at the moment in conjunction with the Scale Up Institute to connect businesses with non-executive skills as well, so they can round out their board, they can mature their governance and so on. And just picking up on something that came up earlier, we are in the process of doing some work around workforce foresighting. So what are the skills that are needed in the future to underpin those, actually building marketplaces and networks and putting into the public domain market-facing data around those things that we hear about where the market is going, and of course connecting back with the Department for Education and others around that. So that system, we're trying to make those connections and join up for the service of the innovation system and the businesses within it. Alongside Innovate UK Business Growth Support, there's Innovate UK KTN, so Knowledge Transfer Network, which is about making those connections and convening. So putting together an innovator with an academic, with a business, with an investor, importantly with a customer as well. And actually, if we can help to form that sort of trinity together, then actually that helps to get that message that we were talking about around de-risking. It helps as an investor, and that's my background. It helps as an investor if you can see the customer that this is eventually going to go to and you understand the route to market and the business model. And I've mentioned investors there, and let's be honest, the government can commit as much as it wants in terms of resource and capital to this, but whatever we do, even if it's 5, 10 billion, that's a drop in the ocean compared to the power of those markets. So how do we bring investors in to support those businesses, and how do we de-risk, as you've mentioned? And I guess there are two programs I'd flag, albeit they're at the earlier stage. They're at that pre-scaled stage, and we need to think about how we expand the reach of those. First is investor partnerships, and the second one is innovation loans, which are both within my portfolio within the business. Now, it's core business as usual now. We were in pilots for those for a number of years, since about 2017. But we now have 80 million for investor partnerships. We have 150 million in the spending review for innovation loans. And if we take investor partnerships first, that is a grant program. So you apply, you get a grant for your projects in the usual way. It's up to 70% for some industrial research. That's all great. What we want in that program is for that to be linked with aligned investment from an investor partner. And we don't want them to give the match. And I wish that we could just lose the word match forever. What we want them to do is to put an equal amount of capital into that business. So if we put in 500,000, they put in 500,000. If we put in 1 million, they put in 1 million. And that's because that brings into the business foundational capital that can be spent. We're de-risking the technology. We're helping with the innovation project. We're helping with that really risky, difficult stuff. And the investors' money can then go into growing the sales team, building commercial function, building financial capability, maturing the governance. And I'm pleased to say we're now up to 115 investor partners who have signed up, who we know are credible, capable, aligned in their thinking, including Amadeus Capital Partners. And we had a really big celebration when they came on board. But they go from relatively small, so angel networks and so on, through to CVCs, people working in particular verticals, be it life sciences or agriculture, ag tech, and so on, but also some bigger generalist investors as well. And they come from the UK, they also come from Europe, and we've got some from the US who have come over and become part of that program as well. And we will continue to grow that base of investors who are interested in, aligned in, and committed to investment in the UK through innovation. And the joy of that program actually is it's not 1 for 1. We typically get 2 for 1 in terms of the investment on that first round. So we give you 500,000, the investor normally comes in with 1 million. And when they follow on 6, 12, 18 months later, it's more than 5 times. So that ability to get an investor in earlier than they would usually come in, you've got them on the hook, they understand your business, you've got the benefit of their experience and insight into your business, and then you've got them on the hook for building syndication, whatever it happens to be, across that network of investors. And we try and make it a network, a cohort that works together to fund future deals as well. So briefly, innovation loans, which is the other thing that I spend my day job doing. We can do up to 2 million for later stage R&D per project. So some businesses we've got 4 or 5 million out to because we're willing to look at sort of multiple loans within that portfolio. And the challenge with later stage R&D is that your subsidy control rules mean that typically that's about 45% support. What we can do on innovation loans in exchange for a little bit of interest, and it's very patiently structured, and some relatively light rules and covenants around the loan document, is to do 100% of that investment, to cover 100% of your costs. And we can do that quarterly in advance. And actually, you only have to pay half the interest during the period when you're actually doing the R&D, when you're actually getting to market. And only once you get to market do we say, okay, we'll start having the money back now, please. And if you're thinking about risk, and we talked about risk earlier, if you imagine the risk appetite of a venture debt lender at senior debt pricing and with senior debt terms, that's where we sit because it's additional to the market. So that's what I spend my day doing. And that investment and seeing the technologies and seeing the businesses take that and then succeed is just absolutely the other thing that drives me through this. And we've had 40, 50 million pound exits within the portfolio. We've had a lot of people struggling because, as we've said, innovation is harder, it takes longer, and it costs more than anyone ever imagines at that front end. But that's our experience, and we will keep doing that. And actually, non-dilutive capital is always helpful when you're then going on to raise. So my last thing is increasingly it's becoming clear that the scale and impact of Innovate UK will be greater the more we can support current and future scale-ups, as well as spin-outs and startups. So that's a bit of a shift for Innovate, but it's a direction that we're heading in. We're doing joint work with the Scale Up Institute. We've got a memorandum of understanding with London Stock Exchange Group. We are moving in that direction, and we will continue to support and grow that opportunity.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Scott. And our fourth and final speaker is Gus Wiseman. He is Head of Investor Relations for the UK government at the Department for Business and Trade. And before that, worked in the Foreign Office. And Gus, it's very good of you to join us. So over to you.
Cheers. Right, I don't need it anyway. Well, thank you very much for welcoming me here to speak. I thought I'd start off. So I'm a big student of history, and I often think the weight of history can teach us many things. And we hear a lot of people talk about big bang moments in history, and I think they miss out one of the first ones, which happened here in 1852, which was the creation of the world's first modern patent office. And that ushered in the 1850s, the first wave of international foreign investment. You had Siemens, Colt, and Goodyear setting up in the UK. Proof that I think as a nation, we've never shied away from exposing British industries to the rigors of international competition. Now, I work for the Department for Business and Trade. As it's been said, our job, our mandate is very much around bringing skills and capital into the UK. I head our investor relations team, and I oversee our relationships with the international capital markets. And that's what I wanted to focus my talk on, is on how we're bringing global capital into the UK and making our innovation ambitions a reality. So part of my job is also speaking at events around the world to give the UK sales pitch. And this is definitely not going to be the UK sales pitch, because this is Team UK PLC already. And this is an audience, hopefully, where we can be really honest about what the problems are and what the ideas are of how to fix them. And my first observation is that the global race for capital is only going to get fiercer. Achieving net zero in the UK, we anticipate it's going to cost 50 to 60 billion pounds per year. That includes 200 billion pounds for decarbonising heat and buildings, 220 billion pounds for decarbonising transport. Then you've got the additional funds needed for water utilities needing a generational upgrade, innovation, the new nuclear fleet, and ultimately that requirement for capital is only going to grow, which sort of leads me to a conclusion that this rough consensus that we've had in the UK for the last 40 years of a relatively laissez-faire market model is drawing to a close, and is drawing to a close around the world. And we may be looking at a next 40 years, which is much more highly interventionist, because it needs to be to manipulate that flow of capital and skills into the areas where it wants it to be. And that's sort of before we get that, and that's driven by the factors of geopolitics, net zero, regulation of AI, all requiring a stronger role for government. And we're not even getting to things like COVID or Brexit. And in that global race for capital, our international competitors, we know, are moving strongly, and they're often able to pull together a much more compelling and coherent offer than we are. I remember when I was posted out to Nairobi, I had a French diplomat tell me a story of a major commercial win that they had for Total. And 12 months later, the Louvre hosted an exhibition on the art and culture of this country. And that just shows you the ability that they have to bring together their soft power offering with their economic diplomacy, and a mix that is essentially unheard of. And maybe that's a stretch ambition for the UK to get to. So that's the sort of muscular competition that we have, I think, around the world, is led by nation states. And it leads me to the conclusion that we as government and industry are going to need to get much better at collaborating together if we're going to get the UK's message across. The second thing I wanted to say was about the UK's capital markets. So my job is mostly engaging with the global capital markets, but to understand the global capital markets, you've got to understand the UK's capital markets and where we're deficient on capital and why. And I think the truth is that the UK's institutional investor market is relatively subscale for what it should be for an economy of its size. We have our base of pension funds, that defined benefit pension funds, we know, are shifting into a lower risk strategy or shifting onto annuities. defined contribution funds are steadily consolidating, but maybe yet to build up that institutional scale or in-house capability. And the Mansion House reforms are a part of addressing that. And if you look at the City of London, and if you look at global, the largest allocators into specific asset types, you'll see that there's a big lack of UK funds at the top of the list. There isn't a single UK fund that's in the top 90 globally for real estate allocations. There isn't a single top 20 UK infrastructure funds. There isn't a single top 40 UK world VC funds, which is British. And ultimately, a lot of that is driven by the fact that we have largely a public pay pension system, and we've been yet to build up the institutional resources of some of the other nations that we're dealing with in terms of their innovation office. We'd welcome thoughts on that, by the way, because I think a lot of other people will have views. I did hear a statistic, which I'd be interested if anyone else has heard this, that if we had set aside funding for if all of the funds that had been set aside for the NHS pension scheme were sort of still live, and in a pension scheme you'd have a £1 trillion pension scheme, and it makes me wonder of what the impact that would have been to the UK's innovation ecosystems, the listing market, the London Stock Exchange, etc. So I wanted to touch on a third observation, which is the global capital markets. So I think in the medium term, things are looking fairly positive. Many of our donor markets of capital which come into the UK are experiencing booms in their pension market. So in the US, Canada, and Australia, they have growing pension markets. The Australian pension funds are forecast to double in size over the next 10 years because of member contributions and the performance of their underlying asset base. And at the same time, those pension funds have less places to invest because many of them are withdrawing or changing their allocations to emerging markets. So my view is that the size of the pie for the UK, and potentially our slice of the pie for global capital markets funding, should increase, which looks positive. And that means more players in the UK, more liquidity in the UK, more secondary market offerings for companies, more money coming into the listing system, more money coming into the VC system, but also creates challenges in having a capital market system where we have reliance on sort of particular reliance on international capital. A really good example of this is the real estate market. 96% of real estate transactions in the City of London have international capital at the table. I've not seen the statistics that I've heard that drops down to around 75% in London, and in the regions it's around 5 to 10%. And in a nutshell, that shows one of the challenges of levelling up is trying to broaden out that base of global capital to make it go into to other parts of the UK and shift away from its bias towards prime locations. So I wanted to say a couple of sort of hypotheses of things which I think we're doing already or we need to be doing more of to work with the global capital markets. So my first hypothesis is that we should be creating the conditions for global capital to participate in the UK. And I think a really good example of that is happening now at the Prime Minister's lead, which is being a regulation setter. So with the AI summit at Bletchley, the UK is able to bring together actors from around the world, even those who aren't necessarily like-minded. We're able to come to the table and hopefully set the momentum going for global agreements around AI. And that's not the only place that we're trying to set the standards for regulation. We're doing it as well in areas like critical minerals, fusion energy, SMRs, quantum. And I think that shows leadership for the UK, but it also shows initiative. If we can grasp the benefits of being a regulation setter rather than a regulation taker, that's going to have knock-on impacts down the line. The second thing is we need to take the UK's message out to the global capital markets in a creative way. So a lot of my job is thinking about how we can position the UK favourably with future funding sources. So we're doing a lot of work with the Australian pension fund industry, We've had 3 Australian pension funds open up or set their ambition to open in the UK in the last 2 years. But there's still potentially a next 10. We're working with several US university endowments who we think have potential to allocate more into the UK to open up funds and offices here. US state level pension funds, even places like the Brazilian pension fund industry have tremendous institutional capital resources, but have constraints on how that capital can flow. So there's a lot of positive markets that we need to be working with, and we are. And we have a great story to tell of venture capital funds moving to the UK. Just in the last several years, since 2020, we've had Sequoia, General Catalyst, Andreessen Horowitz. We have NEA, which is just going to be doing its formal launch, we think, next year, and IVP and Bessemer. So you've had 6 of the world's largest 6 VC funds have set up in the UK since the last election. And that's actually a really tremendous accomplishment, I think, and is going to bring more capital and skills to bear. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on, just because I know we're in a room with so many innovators and people that work with the university ecosystem, and this is, I suppose, to lodge a thought rather than to give a sort of a proposal. But I sort of wonder of, a lot of focus has been on the UK's rejoining of Horizon, which I think is going to bring lots of benefits. But there's also been, as far as I can see from my perspective, a revolution in the way that universities are approaching technology transfer and the approaches that they have to the shares that they're taking in spin-outs and making a more pro-entrepreneur, pro-spin-out environment within their universities. And I think that idea of bringing capital to the sources of innovation and having a system that allows that capital and attracts that capital to come in is incredibly important. And the more that those universities seek to dominate a global niche, sort of select global niches, dominate global niches, that they'll be able to spin out firms who in turn can dominate their global niches and grow. And would love to hear other people's thoughts on that. So thanks very much for having me.
Good. Great. Well, we had it was an interesting panel because, of course, we had, in a way, the challenge was from Simon, the practitioner, and we had 3 other practitioners, but who were all in different ways trying to tackle the challenge that Simon has set. So before turning to you and our online participants, I just wondered, Simon, because you did set a very powerful challenge and you have your own experience. Anything you want to add about whether through smart VC capitalists, through the kind of support you get from Innovate UK, from the attempt to attract investment from around the world, how much of that is working and what more do you think still needs to be done? And from your list of 4 categories, give us your top, policy priorities that you would still think needs to happen to promote scale up.
I think just following up on the Innovate piece, I will say that Innovate UK is actually very, very good. And has been for many, many years. The early stages of being supported, the grant, you said, let's not think about the grant funding, but actually it is very useful, especially in those early days. We do some good things, and I don't want to keep talking about the missing things. We should appreciate what we do have in this country as well. But from my perspective, I go back to that point on risk. Everything that we talk about in terms of financing for Paragraph is predicated on risk. How close are we to customers? How close are we to delivering our volume demand? How close are we to achieving the objectives that have been set out by the business? And really what I feel is the big kind of drive that we have is making the risk appetite in the UK, dare I say it, more similar to the US. And there are lots of things that happen in the US that are different from what happened in the UK. I mean, it's great you just talked about the large funds coming over to the UK. Why are they coming here? Are they coming here to put more money in, or are they coming here because they know the innovation is great? My fear is they're coming here because they know the innovation is great, and selling off companies at a certain stage is quite easy to do when you've got large capital put in the first place. So how do we make sure that capital turns into scaling capital in the UK? And really, I think the government can do quite a lot. Which I talk about, I mentioned just to a side subject, I mentioned EIS funding previously. In Paragraph's early days, we were stopped from getting EIS funding because our gross asset limit was too high. We're a manufacturing business, therefore we have to own equipment. And because that equipment has a value at a certain depreciation point, I can't take on or get the benefits of EIS. It's ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. Just because of the type of business we are, we have handcuffs put on us. So it's that type of thinking. How do we take the handcuffs off businesses with the policies that we apply? And then really, I believe there's some great work going on. Amelia mentioned it with the British Business Bank opening up the Breakthrough Fund, and that really draws attention to the fact that the UK government wants businesses to be here, which allows external capital to come in. I'm going to say it, it's not enough though. You know, you're comparing to the other environments in the world, whether that's the US or whether it's like we've been approached before, like China, where actually they can turn around and say, actually, if you come here, we'll give you 100 million. Of course, there are things that we wouldn't want to do in order to go to China, but it's that type of thinking. I always think about, we don't have all the money in the UK. How do we attract internal investment? How do we attract inbound investment? And it's those kind of things that we should think about.
Yeah. And I think the US-UK comparison is very limiting. One entrepreneur said to me this observation, people here would have heard it. He said the difference between the US and the UK, they always say, is if you're raising money in the UK, take your CFO. If you're raising money in the US, take your CTO. So for us, the risk is elaborate cash flow forecast years out. For the US, it's whether someone who's probably got a sufficiently broad education to understand the technology you're talking about thinks that it stacks up as a technology proposition. It's just a completely different conversation. Now, I think George Freeman, you raised your hand, so you're gonna criticize the record of the government recently in doing this, and tell us how it can do better in the future. George, is that the idea? Over to you.
But Simon, the point that Simon made.
No, actually, don't worry, the microphone is on and it'll help our online participants hear it.
Can you hear me? I think the point you made about cross-party approaches to science and technology is completely key. And to the extent that we've been able to make success in the last 15 years, I'd be the first to say, and have often, that David and I, were building on the leadership of Peter Mandelson, David Sainsbury, Paul Drayson. And I really hope, and I'm pretty confident actually, that she and Peter Kyle are looking at what we've done and the best of it and wanting to provide continuity. This is a really urgent agenda. I'll just share with you one tidbit of a stat. When I was working in the biotech cluster in Cambridge 15 years ago, there were 4 big scale-ups in biotech. Since then, the cluster has about trebled. Do you know how many there are now? 3. We are really good in this country at incubating lots of really exciting little businesses and then selling them to the Americans really cheap. And they put 2 noughts on the end and put them in NASDAQ. And this has become a really big problem. So thank you to the foundation for it. I just thought I'd share, I think it's incumbent on me to share. I think the 3 things that are most exciting, the Mansion House reforms. I mean, if we can finally properly open up the city to turn around and stop investing in derivatives and start investing in fast growing companies. Secondly, the extraordinary growth of the clusters around the country. This isn't just a one-shot wonder. It's not just Cambridge, not just Oxford or King's or Imperial. There's about 30 around the country and we're trying to map them properly. And thirdly, I think the extraordinary convergence of technologies. It's not just life science. We're very good at engineering biology and we're good at AI and and when these things start to merge, you start to get something very exciting. The 3 big barriers I think are, I really worry at the Mansion House, if the Treasury just think that giving the city the freedom will do it, they're wrong. It's about people. And we have to have a cadre of people in the city who understand the pipeline that's coming down the S&T pipe. And I think that's a big bit of work in the next couple of years. 2 skills, I'm really worried. We're quite complacent. We think that, you know, we're going to create 300,000 new jobs. That's the DFE gap. I think it's more like 600,000. And we're not yet properly working out in DFE how many bioinformaticians, how many AI, literally mapping out what the sector needs. And the third, I think, is investability. There is a wall of money out there. I used to meet it on behalf of UK with Dominic Lord Johnson. I mean, billions and billions, but they don't know who to pick up the phone to. And there's a few fund of funds, but I think the Treasury and government have got to make it much easier to deploy $1 billion into Greater Manchester, $1 billion into West Midlands over the next 5-10 years, property and S&T. So those would be my three for what it's worth, and I look forward to helping the debate.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask Gus, do you want to just comment, and then we'll come to Nigel, but do you want to comment, especially on that last point, because the challenge, if I may say so, I think things like linking the cultural appeal and the business pitch, the kind of things that have been done in trade missions, the frustration is if Mubadala say, we want to invest £1 billion in UK technology, it's very hard, and George has had this experience, I had it, actually constructing a proposition that enables them to invest in around a cluster is very difficult. You can go down to the individual company level, whereupon you find that Ontario teachers know something about the British technology base that no British pension fund seems to know. And so the Ontario teachers know. But what about these external investors who want a kind of package? How close are we to having an offer for them?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that the global investor base is just becoming increasingly sophisticated. They're really upping their game in terms of their own technical proficiency and understanding of those niche market segments, and they're wanting to dive into ever greater detail than they have done. And I think part of that is them wanting a little bit of optionality in how they deploy money themselves, whether they go in through fund of funds or whether they go in more directly in some instances and build that capability and ability to operate both ways. I think you're absolutely right. Packaging opportunities for investors is really hard. I think we've struck an agreement with several of the Middle Eastern states called sovereign investment partnerships, where we have an overarching government to government agreement, and we work together to show them opportunities which meet their investment preferences. And those are long-term, multi-year partnerships, and we've had really good traction with them. And I think what makes them work best is by about sort of government knowing when the right time is to convene and bring people together, and when it's the right time to step away and let the real innovators and the entrepreneurs and the business owners step forward and give their pitch. Because the best salespeople are the people who are doing the business, running the businesses and doing the innovation themselves.
Very good. Let's take another question, then I'll open it up across the panel. Nigel, and do introduce yourself. There we are. Thanks.
Nigel Toon, I'm a CEO and co-founder of GraphCore. I also sit on the board of UKRI. I have 2 points, well, one challenge and 1 point. Gus, Sequoia et al. Bringing their capital to the UK, they're coming because of our rule of law. This is the best place to establish their organization. They're not necessarily investing that money in the UK, they're investing it across Europe. So I think that's something we need to be very wary of. We're still competing with the other European countries for their investments. So let's not congratulate ourselves too strongly on that point. The second thing I would like to say is a level set. What do we mean by scale up?
Yeah.
So let's say you want to raise £100 million for scaling your business. You don't want to do that from pulling together 10 investors. You want 2 or 3. So let's say you're looking for a $50 million check or a £50 million check to cornerstone your investment. No investor is going to invest more than 5% of their fund. So that means it needs to be £1 billion fund for them to invest. Single fund, not assets under management, single fund, that they need to be investing in. Where in the UK is there a £1 billion deep tech, late stage fund? It doesn't exist. So that's just the capital problem.
Yeah.
So we really need to level set on what do we mean by scalability. It's not £3 million.
Yeah.
It's not £10 million. It's £100 million.
Yeah.
And we don't have funds that are big enough.
Yeah.
And then that's the problem of why can't we get money to come in? Because if let's say a Middle Eastern sovereign wealth fund wants to invest, they don't want to write a £10 million check. They want to write 100 or 200 million pound check to put actual money to work, but there's nowhere they can write that check to.
I think that's a very powerful intervention there. I mean, I personally would start, I mean, influenced by Shoku's and others, with kind of 20 million plus, but 20 million to 100 million. And I'm going to start with Scott and make other comments as well. But I think one of the challenges in government has been that finding a 20 million budget to spend on 10 or 20 initiatives in a particular cluster or area of technology is doable. Finding pots of public money large enough to make individual 20 million investments has proved incredibly hard. And even from Nigel and me both having served on the board of UKRI, and even with the resource of UKRI, it's very hard to pass that up. So when you said, and it was very encouraging that Innovate UK was trying to get into that space, what kind of resource, perhaps in partnership with the British Business Bank, can you raise?
Well, that's part of the challenge, of course. I guess the question is, how much public money do you need to catalyze that investment from other partners into a fund structure? But you're right. We're getting propositions which are, I want to do a £50 million fund in agritech or £100 million fund in agritech. Great. At a certain level, there is still a funding and financing gap for those companies that got their technology almost to the point of commercialization, but they're still adapting it, polishing it, getting it, proving the business model and getting it to market. So we can address that challenge, but I think we have to look to BBB where it's intervening in financial markets, and its role is to address market dysfunction in that space, because that's the mechanism that the government has in order to actually address those challenges, and be that guarantee schemes or whatever else. So even that is challenging. So when I was at British Business Bank, we had an agreement that we made with the European Investment Fund around its Innofin guarantee program. Essentially provided a 75% first loss uncapped guarantee. We wrote, I think, £80 million worth of guarantees. I think there are about £5 million worth of lending done under that program. It's even that 75% shift in risk appetite and first loss cover wasn't enough to get investors to shift their risk appetite. So I think the challenge is finding what is necessary to actually catalyze that behavior and to create an investment thesis that works for innovating companies as well as for the next digital platform that looks a bit like the last digital platform but has a particular niche or market opportunity.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in
Yes,
on this large fund point? Because if you look at the difference between the US and the UK on how VC funds get their money and where that comes from, in the US, 60% of that comes from pension funds, and currently in the UK and Europe, it's 10%. And this is huge, understanding of why we have this big difference in the size of the funds, and why we have people like Ontario Teachers and OMAs and people who have such large funds. They can't just invest it in Canada, but they're coming over here to invest it here. So part of the problem is if we can unlock this pension money, but actually get it to come into UK VC funds, not just go and chase down US funds.
Yes, and let's put you on the spot here, because as representative of the investor community. So when I asked Nestle auto-enrolled pension entity, kind of a government creation, currently with about 35 billion of assets. How they invested their assets. Their strategy is 75% of those are invested abroad, which they regard as how they discharge their obligations as trustees towards the people saving with them. They regard that as the rational strategy which they are legally obliged to follow. There are various people across political parties itching to be a bit more, give a rather stronger steer to organizations like that about how they spend their 35 billion. What kind of steer could you envisage having an effect in those circumstances? Is it consistent or overrides their obligations as trustees?
Yeah, there are a few issues, but mainly I think it's education of those people there of what the returns could be from investing in this particular asset class, because they don't have the team members there at the moment that have experience of doing that. And I know the government is trying to help slightly here by introducing this VC training scheme to try and train up those types of people. But they very much focus on, you know, what are the fees going to be if we invest with particular managers, and instead of being focused on fees, they need to focus much more on upside returns. And so that's why it comes into the education piece of what these assets could deliver and in what time frame. And it's why they're so nicely matched, because these deep tech investments tend to take much longer than a traditional tech company. And so matching it with pension money, where you don't need the returns back, you know, so quickly, makes a lot of sense.
And could you envisage, what would your reaction be to something that went beyond education to some kind of strong guidance through to instruction that 10% of your fund should be in British technology companies or something? Would that react with, would you react with horror, or do you think that kind of steer is
Well,
necessary?
I'd be delighted.
Well, you're obviously
yeah.
compliant. Okay, you're compliant.
But
The pension funds across the industry.
Yeah, that would be, you know, that would be a huge amount to sort of almost flood the UK market. We couldn't deploy that in the you know, in the short term. There's talk about setting up a 50 billion fund, which would be available. So in a sort of fund of fund setting, and that would be great. So yeah, it would be very positive for our industry if that money was to come in.
Thank you. Gus, your comments?
I mean, I agree. I think the initiation of new funds of funds, anything that can bring capital at scale to bear, so that UK VC funds can access that and have an easier time fundraising, is ultimately going to be very effective. You know, I don't think, and it's not my place to comment on whether the allocations for UK pension funds should be set centrally and how that should happen. I think there's sort of complex arguments there around prudential governance that need to be considered, and the rights and the obligations of the pension holders. But what I will say is that I think there's been a great deal of movement from within the industry, which has been really recognised the scale of the opportunity within UK VC. It's seen the growth and the returns from within the sector. It's seen the immense capability of UK VC fund managers. And the brilliant startups that sit underneath and have grown, and the tremendous track record of unicorns, and they want to participate in that because of the good and because of the carrot rather than needing a stick. So the things like the VC Compact have and are, I think, incredibly important signals that the industry and government are setting in place together. And overall, I think that fills me with a good degree of confidence.
Thank you. And I'm now going to turn to, well, yes, let me turn to Simon, because of course the fact is you've been wrestling with this, these large funds that do have the resource, following on the arithmetic set out so clearly by Nigel. There are lots of them in the US and China, and they come knocking on your door. What is your experience of the UK capacity in that area?
I think Nigel's put it really well. There isn't the capacity in the UK. We've seen interest from South Korea now investing, Taiwan investing. So we're starting to get more funds around the world that are looking at UK businesses, and actually they are interested in scaling businesses, which is nice. But there's a real barrier in trying to get funding from Asia, because one, there's a cultural difference and the expectations are different from what the business should be, and two, there's usually a general kind of almost unsaid but condition that you are going to be in that country at some point in time. So there are, there's kind of funds out there that you can talk to that understand what you're doing, but they are going to shape your business, and that's another factor that comes into it.
Yeah.
Even the US funds, you talk to US funds now, there is an expectation that at some point you will be in the US, and not just in the US, headquartered in the US is most of the point. Which then comes back to the whole ecosystem of listing in the UK, which is further down. Let's not get into that at the moment, but that's another subject altogether.
Well, one US investor said to me, I think pretty well, he said, well, the great thing about Britain, because this is the scale-up challenge seen from their end, the great thing about Britain is you grow the world's best corporate veal. We grow the veal, they turn it into beef, and that's how they see us. Now, we've got several questions around the room. Let's collect them. There's first one back there. Sorry, the light's quite tricky to see, but guy back there, yeah.
Serially set up a number of semiconductor and software businesses, which we've sold to American, Chinese, and European buyers over the last 20 years. So my question, firstly, I completely agree with Nigel's comment about the need for these mega funds in the UK. He's completely on the nose on that. One question though is if there is just a hard limit on the amount of capital that we have available, there's a hard limit on the amount of talent that we have in the country. Do you think the Treasury orthodoxy of not picking winners needs to be changed, and that we need to adopt something which is more focused so we can concentrate people and have fewer zombie companies and more companies that can be significantly bigger?
Right, I'm going to collect several questions. There was another one here. Oh, we have got to, yeah, we'll go around the room. Let's, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you very much, David. So James Mawson, I run a global association helping corporates invest in startups, as well as on the other side, university venture funds. One observation, looking at the list here, 120 or so people registered, only one's from a large corporate interested in deep science and technology. But I think from all the questions and observations being said here, that corporates could be part of that solution, and actually having UK corporates invest in and support in startups can help catalyze some of that inward investments. And they do have the balance sheets that can provide it. So just to give you one little factoid, the largest venture funds in the world are corporates. Tencent, 134 billion assets under management. SoftBank, Aramco announced 6 billion to their VC programs. So I think getting UK corporates, which when you look around the world, we collect the data, UK corporates underinvest in local startups compared to every other country in the world. There's a lot of inward investment from foreign corporates, but there's not the indigenous. Unlock the mansion house for the pension funds to support VCs. Corporates using strategic investors can also act as LPs and VC funds and direct invested. And I think you link the two together, you will find a lot of catalyzed. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think there's another question close to you. Yeah, past. Yes. Yes.
Sorry, Stephen Carhenny. I work for or run Ty6. We're a small company, so listening to some of these comments, we're right down at the minnow size on that. I have probably interacted most of the people on the table at some stage when I've apart from Amadeus, I must say. For small companies going to look for scale-up funding, and Scott knows us quite well, the amount of money we need at this stage and that we could justify at this stage is quite a lot smaller. But if we don't get to that step, we won't get up to sort of level that Paragraph and others are at. Programs that I think were run previously like AMPSCI and the Horizon 2020 small business initiatives, where they have a large chunk of government money, of grant money, about 2.5 million in the Horizon 2020, but that is then backed by the opportunity to get a venture fund through those grant schemes. And I've spoken to Innovate UK quite a lot. That would really help, but it would need venture capitals involved. And the message we've had is, if you are too far away from the market, we do lightweight aerospace materials. So we're going to be a number of years to get them qualified. It's not attractive because your funds need to pay back. Yeah. Obviously in a short time, we need a long. Yeah. Is there anything that can help with that?
Right. Let's pause now and go to the panel, and then I'll take questions from the other side of the room. And let's start with you, Scott. And I can also report to you, and so don't feel obliged to answer all three, but there's a picking winners question, there's a corporate funding question, there's this tricky issue if you're both small and have quite a long payback time. And I can report that we've had one inquiry from someone who's asking for Innovate UK to facilitate introductions to investor partners. And they're going to ask for your advice for their next Innovate UK grant. Who do we speak to about a later stage R&D loan? So you can do a bit of advertisement as well in answer to that question.
So the advert is that the Innovate UK KCN has an access to finance team, and they are there to facilitate those introductions. Sorry, and actually my credit team itself will do pre-work with companies to help them understand that we're not just asking about the project, we're asking about the business, the plan, the funding strategy, and so on, and coaching them through some of the financials that we're looking for.
And they access an Innovate UK website.
Yes, Innovate UK KCN website has a list of all the experts.
Right. Now, the other question then, want to pick, to what extent do you have to, well, you choose the picking winners, the small company, the corporate.
I think both. So the notion, so Innovate UK runs a competitive process. It's a fair and open process, but those grant applications are assessed. So there is a degree of judgment and so on, and then there's a ranked list, and actually those that score highest, the ones. So there is a degree of, we're picking the most innovative options across our grant programs. And within the loans program, we have a credit committee which I chair, which has internal and external experts on it. And we sit down and we absolutely make decisions on that company, gap to market, where are we? Do we believe their funding strategy, their numbers are heroic? Can we bring those down in the sense that, we make commercial judgments. It's just that actually we say yes more often than no at the end of that. But it is a process of actually choosing, as long as everyone has a fair opportunity to access it. I don't think there's any problem with trying to choose the best technologies and the best businesses to deliver those technologies to market. And I think part of the products and services journey that we're on is to look at pathways. So it's not just fund and forget, it's fund here, okay, where have we got to, where's the progress? Well, here's the next thing that might get you to the next stage and so on. And I don't disagree at all, there's a massive challenge where you have a need for a relatively large chunk of investment with a relatively long time to market. And I think it's a challenge we haven't yet solved, but it's one that we're trying to think about what's the idea. Now, it might be that a government investment in a fund structure alongside other LPs, where it's similar to British Business Bank's enterprise capital funds, where there's an unequal return in order to incentivize venture partners into that and make good commercial judgments, might be an option for the sorts of companies, but it's going to have to be more patient than we currently see.
Very good. Thank you. Amelia?
Yeah, maybe just to address Stan's point. So in some ways, the government has done a little bit of that, of trying to pick winners. So the quantum strategy is an interesting one because a huge amount of money has gone into there. And the latest strategy amount was something like 2.5 billion. So really doubling down on quantum technologies in the UK. And if you look how much has been funded in Europe and the UK versus the rest of the world, a significant amount of quantum funding has come by governments into companies here. So I think that's an interesting area where there has been a pick to try and really promote that industry at all level of the sector. It's yes, we have competitive companies. We've just seen, OQC have just raised 100 million. That was, there was some public money in there, but it was led by a Japanese investor. So that's an example of Simon saying that you've got investors from the east coming west, which is interesting. From the press release, it looks like they want them to go and operate in Japan, which ties into the same point. But it does seem to be working. We've had significant funding rounds in the UK of the quantum companies. So I think that particularly technology they have picked, Simon can talk about the semiconductor strategy. So I think there are areas they're trying to pick, and that's my one example where I think they're probably doing a reasonable job at the moment.
Good, thank you. And Gustin, do you want to also, a question we've had online, following actually from an intervention of Simon's, but do you think that trade associations can play a useful role? And I don't know to what extent you in your department work with trade associations as you try to aggregate pitches for overseas or other investors.
Yeah, thank you. And I might just touch on first as well the points on picking winners, because I very much agree with what Amelia said. I think that this doesn't necessarily have to be about picking companies. This can be about, if government's going to do it, it's going to be at a more macro level, the picking policies, picking technologies that reflect the USP and the strengths of the UK, our innovation strengths, the assets that we already have. And part of that is set out well within the government's science and innovation strategies. It's not possible for a country to pursue a globally competitive position in absolutely everything. There will be some things which we really want to focus on as a nation. And I think harnessing industry and government together to make those decisions is right and part of the strategy. And I think trade associations are a hugely powerful part of the UK's offering. We work incredibly closely with many of them in taking missions of British companies out overseas to meet buyers of their products, to meet investors of their products. They can be superbly useful in cohering the the issues and the challenges and the proposals that industry has to improve the regulatory environment here, to improve the policy environment. So in terms of sort of packing a punch for industry and bringing one voice, I personally and our teams work with trade associations on a really regular basis. So I think that's a wonderful question and a really good idea.
Thank you. And Simon, your observations.
So before I get myself into trouble, DCIT, I think, was a great movement by the government to be able to focus on technology, which of course covers deep tech, and they're now getting involved in investment. But to follow on from Amelia and answer Stan's question, I also see the opposite. The semiconductor strategy has been nonsense. I think it's great that we've got a focus on the semiconductor strategy. I think it's brilliant. But within that strategy, we've announced £1 billion worth of investment in 4 major semiconductor spheres. So it's not just that we're going to put $1 billion in over 10 years. We've actually decided to try and place some bets in things that need huge amounts of money in each bet. So that macro level of, yes, we've got a strategy is fine, but there is still no clear steer on how we're actually going to deploy the money and make success out of it, because there's just too broad a landscape. And that actually feeds into the question on corporates, because corporates actually want to see where the technology is going and what's being supported. I can tell you now that corporates often think about, and we know this because we're talking to them at the moment, they often think about what's the next investment thesis that we're going to put money into? Yeah. What technologies are we going to go for? And right now, if you don't have that backing of, for example, in the UK, we're going to go after, quantum's a good one. I think it's been good investment in that. But we're going to go after this sector of semiconductor, and a corporate doesn't get the steer on whether they can invest in that company or not. So those two things are interlinked, but I would say that, let me just end that by saying, I do think the government is trying to move in the right direction. I just think it's not quite enough.
Yeah. Certainly, the inhibitions, and I used to battle against terrible inhibitions about doing any of this, they are going heavily influenced because of the security people. You're absolutely clear about the value of technology. There's one Cambridge entrepreneur put it very well to me. He said, why is it that the security services understand very clearly the significance of my technology and won't allow me to have anything to do with the Chinese, but the Treasury is so doubtful they can possibly assess the value of any technology, they won't probably fund it themselves. So that was the paradoxical position we were in. And I think basically the security people have won the argument that these matter. I would comment on what Gus said, because I used to think, of course, you have to identify technologies, like I did the 8 great technologies, but not companies. However, the trouble is that if you don't do companies, you're quite inhibited. We had an issue at the start of the coalition with Sheffield Forgemasters, which was our company that made particular forms of steel that were very relevant for the nuclear industry. And because it was not, we're going to make an investment in a capacity, it was actually one company, it was far harder to win the argument you should invest in Sheffield Forgemasters, and Sheffield Forgemasters was not funded. And if it had been a little sector strategy, it probably would have been. But people didn't like the idea it was one company, and there was massive controversy about it in 2010. A decade later, as evidence of how the world has changed, that company now belongs to the MOD, who just bought it because they thought it was so strategically significant, they needed to own it, and there was no controversy whatsoever. So that is a measure of how the intellectual environment has shifted in the last 10 years, driven by the defense and security people. So often it is individual companies.
Can I just give a shout out to the UK Infrastructure Bank, because they've just come in significantly into a semiconductor in Cambridge, and that was a direct individual, picked a company. How much is it, Simon? 70 million that they did in that round, big amount, and they're doing manufacturing outside Durham. So,
And one of the issues in the life sciences, and George has gone now, but one of the frustrations in the life sciences, which is partly EU rules, is that a company comes up with a great idea of a product to sell to the NHS, and the NHS appraises it and likes it, and then says, because of open procurement rules, we will now describe your technology in generic terms and open up to everybody to see if they wish to pitch this business. So it's actually very hard for an individual company, even if it's doing well, to get an NHS procurement contract without at some stage in the process it being thrown open on a generic basis to everyone else. So the company's not so I'm shifting my view on it. I think just saying we can't, of course, do individual companies is itself I've come to conclude, actually part of the problem. So on this side, questions there. And let's start at the back and work forward. And that will be, I think, probably our final round. Yeah.
Thank you. Nick McNaughton, my company helps universities commercialize their unique IPs. Observations here, LPs in Australia. So they're willing to put money into venture funds, but they want a hedge bet, which is that they get a front row golden ticket to see the growth companies so that they can invest directly with them. I think that's very important for the UK to ensure they think of that too. And just for the audience here, the total value of superannuation pension money in Australia is the 4th or 5th largest on earth, not just per capita. And so the Canadians and Australians are very important to the Brits. I encourage study tours, inbound study tours, because they are looking to invest in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move forward. Yes, a couple of questions there.
Hi, Ilya Raswich, University of Birmingham. So I sit at a lovely nexus, I think, anyway, of advanced materials and higher education. So I want to take it back probably more to the micro level again. First three speakers all spoke about skills, and education was brought up again later. I have my own thoughts on this, which I won't expound now. Suffice to say that I think that universities aren't fleet of foot enough to solve some of these problems at the moment. But what actually are those skills / is it that we don't even know what the positions are that people are moving into that would be needed in order for these companies to succeed?
Right. What is the skill shortage? Yes. Then let's keep moving. Yes.
Hi. So my name is Piera Carugno. I head up R&D strategy and spend in the Government Office for Science. My team advises the GCSA Professor De Angela McLean on a number of subjects. And one of them is actually how can we get better at spending public R&D funding, and also how government can get better at pulling through technology to improve delivery of public services. Besides R&D grant funding and classic procurement routes. So my question to the panel is really, do you see the role of government both as a potential investor and end customer more as a hurdle or as an opportunity? Because we have examples in the US and the UK, like InQtel, Barda Ventures, and the National Security Strategic Investment Fund, that suggest that it's more government as a customer and investor is more of an opportunity than a hurdle, but I'd be interested in understanding your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that. Non-dilutive funding, best sort. Yes.
Hi, so yes, it's Chian Royal, MP for Newcastle Central and the Shadow Minister of Science, and George has left, but I did want to reassure Gus that there is in fact, and everyone, that there is a cross-party consensus on the importance of scaling up and commercializing our UK IP. And there are maybe differences about what the best way is to do that, but one of the things that we are proposing is an industrial strategy council to try and deliver a kind of cross-parliamentary consistency. There's so much to, this is exactly what one of the key issues we're looking at. And just by the way, we're launching our finance report on UK finance on the 1st of February. There's too much to, I just want to pick on one thing specifically, though. There's a lot of things, but Amelia talked about the lack of sort of, if you like, experience of growing companies and exiting and creating money and taking and taking out a position which taking the returns which enabled you to put back into the local economy and then grow more companies that in the UK. And I was recently in Australia, and I was speaking to Main Sequence, who are the sort of run the investment fund for the Australian equivalent of UKRI. They with 100 million of government money, they raised 900 million. And I do wonder, it's not clear whether the panel is saying, or some of the panel are saying that there's a lack of capital, and we're sitting, a few miles away from the biggest capital markets in the world, or perhaps the second biggest now, or whether there's a lack of people with the experience to attract that capital. Because it isn't always the innovators or the inventors who are the best people to talk to the markets about what they've invented. And I think in speaking, in wanting to regionalize this as well, if we're going to have investment funds across the country, what is the best shortcut to getting that kind of talent and experience and knowledge of actually attracting funds, scaling up companies and exiting, getting that here into this country and say here into Newcastle and Bristol as well?
Great, thank you very much, Chief, those points. Yes.
Yeah, Adam Lark from Lang O'Rourke. I may be one of the large corporates. And my experiences in corporate technology and innovation development work very closely with Innovate UK on a number of occasions, AMSCI and others, and focus now on the energy infrastructure transition that we have to make, SMRs and other things. So very refreshed about what has been said in the panel around, how do we make UK the place for UK to invest in?
Yeah.
That's the big question. And so really we seem to be very good at the small end of the spectrum, but what we're not very good, I would argue, and how can we get better at supporting the larger end of the spectrums, the big companies, because you have to make lots of growth in lots of different small companies to achieve the same outputs as if you make, a growth in a large company. So how do we enable our large companies with the right investment environment to invest in the UK and make it really count? That's the question.
Thank you. And then question here.
Thank you. Nick from PRO. I want to help you out, David. I want to bring Chi's question and Adam's question together to put to the panelists. I work with a number of deep tech companies and companies which work in the support those firms, and great to see quite a few in this room tonight. I go around all the country talking to companies, and they have lots of similar issues. First off is the UK's great at innovation, particularly taking science and turn it into businesses. But we do have a problem of turning these businesses into global leaders. Now, I can go to a data center, which are key to the AI infrastructure down in the southwest of England, and they're struggling to get power from the grid. I can go up to Anglesey, talk to scientists who are working on nuclear fusion. They're struggling to get people in who have the right qualifications. And I could talk to biotech companies in Cambridge who just don't have the lab space. So bringing Chi's question in here is, would the panel, and I know some members of the civil service where I'm probably giving you work here, welcome a government strategy on scaling up, particularly scaling up on deep tech companies?
Right. Okay. Let's have our final observations from the panel, and let's start. And also, Scott, you're not just now Innovate UK, you're previously British Business Bank, and of course, British Business Bank is relevant to some of the questions, Chi's and others. So far away.
So just picking up on some of the points around the room, government's role in procuring innovation and being the first adopter, absolutely. There is a small business research initiative, so SBRI, which needs a better name. But that is about pre-procurement. That is about buying that opportunity, providing a contract, so non-dilutive funding, 100% funding, in order to test ideas, try things in markets to see whether they have the impact. And the NHS makes massive use of those. Innovate UK funds them. They would be even more powerful if that pre-procurement was followed by a procurement.
Yep.
So how you link those things and how you make those things work as a joined up system is hugely important, but massively powerful. And actually, that's not just at central government level, that's at local government. Yep. So if you think about net zero technologies and adoption and where those things are actually going to be impactful, local purchasing of technologies around green technologies and so on will actually help to catalyze that. And just coming back to that pension point earlier, local government pension scheme is valued at about 370 billion. And it's governed by parliamentary regulation, which says, and you can do this or you can do that. So potentially there are hooks and there are channels for releasing some of that capital. Yeah. Just briefly around the idea of sort of infrastructure and so on. I know Catapult's had a slight rocky moment earlier, but building those centers and building around the high value manufacturing catapult, the compound semiconductor catapult, and so on, and beginning to establish clusters and defining roles for place is something which is key to Innovate UK. So if you hear my chief executive Indro speak about this, he talks about Innovate UK as a cube where we have domains and technologies as one axis, we have products and services as another, and the third axis is place. So building around technology, capability, skills, availability, and various other things is a part of what we're doing to make an innovation system really work.
Great. Thank you very much. Amelia?
Yeah, just on that procurement point, so NSIF, so the National Security Strategic Investment Fund, has worked very well there of bringing security technologies very quickly into government, so private to public at speed. And it's managed to bypass a number of procurement processes. So they deal with quick procurement. That's worked really well for sort of test projects. But the problem is when you then want to go into longer term contracts with government, it's been slow. So that bit needs to be sorted out. So if you've done a test project, like go through and make it quicker. That's worked well for security technology. Let's move it on to other areas. It's so depressing to invest in medical technology companies where they just go to the US. Yeah, and we've got to get them coming into the UK. You know, we as consumers miss out on these technologies because the companies in the UK cannot sell in. You know, it's a well-known problem, but let's try and sort out the procurement and use the NSIF model as a good example. The same with the police. It's really difficult to get technologies in, education, etc. Just like to try and replicate what NSIF has done and make NSIF bigger.
Yeah, one life sciences investor said to me they would not invest in any life sciences company that had selling to the NHS as part of its business plan. That was just what they learned from experience, and it's a very frustrating when we're in that situation. Gus, yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think I just wanted to echo a lot of what's been said in the room and on the panel of the strengths and the aptitude that I think UKIB, the British Business Bank, and SIF are bringing to the table. I think that capital and the investment skill that they're bringing to bear is really having an impact. I suppose my argument earlier, which I tried to craft, was that I think that the scale of the capital requirements that we have to achieve our net zero ambitions alongside the innovation ambitions to keep pace with the technological change around the rest of the world requires a further uplift in the amount of capital that we can deploy into the UK. And that means doing both things at once, of working really well with the global capital markets and being really attractive to them with the right conditions for participation, and working really well with the domestic capital markets, with having domestic institutional investors knowing the brilliant funds that we have here and loosening the regulations where we have done so to enable them to invest. So I think we've absolutely got to follow the twin tracks. The thing that we haven't touched on tonight is not just about the access to finance, but access to space for firms, for innovation firms, for scale-ups to grow in, making sure that the clusters around the country are able to build the life sciences campuses, the in-city campuses that they can. And I think that's a really important point that we can't miss as part of this. We've got to keep our focus on creating the space for them to grow. And I, again, really liked some of the ideas that people had. So thanks very much.
Thank you. And Simon.
So some of the points that hit the nerve for me right at the end of the session, which is great. I'll just pick up on 2 points that I think are really, really important. That talent question actually hits it right at the core. What talent do we need? And what do we need to grow? Well, the reason, or the shortages, the question you asked was, where are the shortages? The shortages are across any scaling company, whether that's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it's technical, whether it's manufacturing, because we don't have companies that have scaled before in a large volume. So you can take every single one of those positions and say, well, we can't get people that have had experience in scaling businesses before. So it doesn't matter whether it's a technical expert or it's a sales expert. It's across the whole, it's a catch-22 situation, right? And until we build a base and we start to train everybody that we need, then it's going to be in that situation. For me personally, I mentioned before, I've tried to get a CCO, a really key position in our business, and we're in the golden triangle, as it's called, so we should have great access. 3 CCOs I've had now, none of them have been able to do what we need to do. but also on the other side, I can't get manufacturing technicians because there's no semiconductor industry large enough in the UK for me to be able to just go out and get technicians. I think just to finish on the last question here, I truly believe that everything that's just been said tonight, if there isn't a government scale-up strategy, then we're not doing our job. It's that straightforward, because we need to bring all those things together. That last slide that I put together, that is what is required, a scale-up strategy if we want to be successful.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I would add just, it's great to have had excellent interventions from our four panelists. In terms of those challenges on skills, I think one of my increasing concerns is that because of early specialization, you just don't have the breadth of knowledge that you find in the US. Someone who did their undergraduate degree, where they probably had a major and a minor, and they've probably done physics, but they've also done something completely different like history, and then they've done their master's has been in law, and they've become a lawyer, and they did 3 years physics before that. That kind of richness, the kind of, because what a lot of tech people in the UK say to me is just the conversations with US tech investors are so different because they are multi-skilled. They know the science and tech, and they've also got an MBA or a legal qualification. And I personally think that our master's system, funding on a selective basis master's courses for people to do something that doesn't stick with what they did as undergraduates, but enhances their skills to add and broaden their range so that they get a business qualification, having done physics, things like that. And I also do think that aggregation is now very important to get, following the logic, Nigel's very powerful logic. And I mean, I sat on a cabinet committee 10 years ago that was trying to get local government pension schemes to merge, and that is a battle that still goes on, and the legal framework itself is a constraint, and all the different trustees. But with the kind of funding that there now is in the British Business Bank, with the, I think, another surge of interest in how we can get these smaller funds to get together, I think we do need to create larger pots, and it should be possible given the flows of money into the city. But it's been a really interesting discussion this evening. Thank you all for coming along. Thank you to our panelists, and let's go out and adjourn and have a drink. Thank you very much.